Welcome back. So today we're going to talk about Airbnb. As someone who's been in Airbnb world for a long time or short-term rental world, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about things you need to know if you've already decided to do a nightly rental. And I want to talk about just little tips and tricks and things that have made a difference for me, things that have also saved me money and time, and also things that have been able to bring me more revenue in my nightly rental. First of all, when we say Airbnb, it's almost like when we call something a Kleenex instead of a tissue. Airbnb is a platform that we use for short-term rentals, but really the name of what we're doing is a short-term rental. STR is something you'll hear. You also might hear a VRBO. Again, that's a platform, just like Airbnb, but it's short-term rental, or sometimes there might be something called like a hospitality zone or a transient zone, which I know sounds really funny because transient zone sounds like, you may not have a home at all. But a transient zone is usually like a hotel zone. It's something that just allows a 24-hour stay. So when we talk about Airbnb and STR, I'll probably be using those words synonymously, but just know that that's the same thing. So, first of all, I sell a lot of nightly rentals. That's the other word we're going to use, STR, nightly rental. I know there's a lot right there. But I sell quite a few of them. And when the market's pretty hot, I sell even up to about 50% of what I do is nightly rental. But when interest rates are higher, obviously a lot of investors or people that want to be investors slow down and they don't purchase right away. So, right now, in the last 2 years, we've had quite a bit of a slowdown in the nightly rental space. Also, because some areas have been overbuilt and oversaturated. Also, the product is important. And I want to dive into that a little bit as well, because what you buy is just as important. So, anyway, I end up talking people out of Airbnbs probably just as much as I talk them into a nightly rental or an Airbnb, just because it's not always the first and best investment for someone, unless they're looking for possibly like a home that they want to use occasionally, or they have some kind of emotional attachment to the area. Just recently, I helped a client where he used to fish at a lake right there, and so that he was drawn to that area. Some people, are very drawn to St. George because they have family. They go there often for tournaments and things like that. And so it just kind of depends. But there are nightly rentals all throughout the state of Utah and really throughout the country and world. I'm even starting to do a little networking with other countries like Costa Rica, Dominican Republic. But just kind of looking outside of Utah, I've got connections in Hawaii. I get questions all the time about Hawaii. And I mean, who wouldn't want to own a nightly rental in Maui? So anyway, I've got really good connections there. So if you are looking at doing that, always just come to me first and let me connect you and talk to you about it. But if it's your first investment, it might not be the first investment you want to make because it is a little bit more risky. You don't have a steady income every single month. It's not like a long term rental where you're doing a long term lease, like a 12-month lease, and you may get $2,000 a month or you get some kind of set amount. And so for some people, they don't want that risk. They want to know exactly what they're bringing in on a property. And so a lot of times I talk people into first buying more of a long term holding, like as far as maybe it's a townhome, maybe a condo, a small house, but maybe they want to do something where they do like a 6-month lease or a 12-month lease. And that way they know exactly what they're bringing in. But Airbnb, the returns can be pretty wild. So you can get some amazing returns on Airbnbs. But when I get a call, and I get these calls all the time, people say, "Hey, I want to buy a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, and it's in an area where there's 1,000 different, nightly rental properties." Then that's going to be a lot harder to rent because you've got to make your property stand out. Not to say that it's not possible, but one of the things that if you do go that route, I talk about pets and that, and I'll make that little tangent real quick. I'm going to talk about that. But a lot of people, especially if you're buying in the St. George area, they want to come down with like their dog. They want to be able to go out to the, great outdoors. They want to go and take their dog around. Most nightly rentals do not allow pets at all unless it's a service animal, not even an emotional support animal. So they are not required to take emotional support animals, it only if it's an actual service dog. So that's something to know right there. But most people, it scares them to have animals. And I get that. And I understand. And in most of my Airbnbs, I don't allow pets either. But I do have clients, if they're looking for a return, they can do a smaller property and allow dogs, do a higher cleaning fee, and then also decorate it. I have a client who we had one that was called the Puppy Palace. And so we had little dog bones in the pantry. We had it decorated. There were little dog statues, and it was really cute. And they charged a higher cleaning fee just because of the animals. But they also had really responsible owners. Most people would think, and this is one of the things I want to talk about, most people would think, oh, if you allow an animal, that unit's going to get trashed. But a lot of the dog owners realize that you're kind of doing them a favor by allowing a pet. And so they're very careful and cautious with how they treat your property. So I actually have not seen a lot more damage in animal nightly rentals versus non animal nightly rentals. To be totally honest, a 3-year old can be just as destructive or more destructive than an animal. So you can get them coloring on the walls, drawing on the couch with a pen. And so, and even the teenagers, they get a bad rap. A lot of times people say, oh, I don't want to allow the baseball teams or things coming. But usually, if it's a sports team, they're pretty disciplined. And so and I'm going to say usually, but then their coaches, I a lot of times will even touch base with the coach ahead of time. But usually the coaches want to make sure that you would host them again. And so they're very good about making sure that the kids clean up after themselves. I haven't had a lot of damage. What's interesting, and I'm going to give you a lot of little funny, interesting facts in this podcast today, is that I've actually seen more damage when I rent my place for too cheap, which sounds kind of crazy. And also, so I'd say if you rent too cheap, you're bringing in people. They kind of say, "Oh, this is just a cheap place. I don't need to care for it as much." And so if they're spending more money, they feel a little bit more inclined to take care of it. The other thing that I think is really critical that gets overlooked a lot is just the cleaning. Because if the house is not immaculate and clean, then they don't feel that they need to leave the house very clean. And so if they get there and there's handprints everywhere, like I once went through a nightly rental and there was like peanut butter smears on the light switches and just Cheeto smears, then they're not going to feel like, if you walk into that, some people are going to be cleaning like as soon as they walk in the door because they're going to be like, oh, okay, this is gross. And so they're going to think that you don't have a lot of pride in your ownership of that unit or that people are even watching. And so you want to make sure that they realize there's, first of all, a real person behind your nightly rental, that it's a family. Sometimes we've even had a picture of us in our welcome book. We don't want to put any like super personal information out there. We just will put like our picture and say, our family welcomes you to our home, and without names. And then, but just even that little personal connection can mean that they're going to take better care of your place because I don't know, it's just like this mental thing that they go, okay, I'm staying in somebody else's house. I need to be a guest. But I've only seen the most damage is usually when it's rented too cheap or when it's not cleaned well. So, like if the cleaners have done not such a great job, that could happen. But usually, like I said, with the pets, it's really not a total problem. So that might be surprising, but I would say for my clients that have allowed pets, they usually make at least 20% more, sometimes even up to 35 to 50% more. And in the case of the home that I was telling you about, that's the Puppy Palace, they actually brought in quite a bit more revenue just because it was decorated cute. They really tried to accommodate dogs, and they've really had very little damage. The other thing that's important to know is where you own, because where you own is important because if it's an oversaturated area, then you're not going to make the returns. Also, where you own is important because you've got to know like what things are near there. This sounds crazy, but some of the questions we get, and we even put this a lot of times into the listing, are where's the closest Costco? Which I know sounds so funny, but a lot of times people will come for the whole week. And so they'll just do one Costco run. And I think about when we're in Maui and we've rented homes before, that's what we've done is if you've ever been to Maui, it's kind of funny. You actually land at the airport, and right on the way out of the airport is Costco before you even get to the main light. So everybody just lands. You sometimes bring like freezer bags with you, and then you land, you buy your groceries, and then you go to your place for the week. And that's what a lot of people do. And then since I do a lot in St. George, the reason I also like St. George is people tend to be on vacation. They're people that love the outdoors, and they usually are not the total party type. So if you're in a party location, like in a downtown zone, like, let's just throw out like downtown New York City or something, or in a major hub, then you may attract more of a party scene, and that can be a little bit more problematic. Typically, the guests we have that come through in St. George are families, and a lot of times we even call it three generations. A lot of times it's grandma and grandpa renting the place, it's their kids, and then their grandkids that come. And then you also have golfers that come, you have like women that want to just do a getaway together. So the clientele that we're attracting usually is also a little bit different. So that's just important to know. But even before that, I'm going to kind of go back to why it's important to know where to buy, because a lot of people, they'll look at a place and they'll say, oh, but it's new, it looks nice, it's going to rent well. And that is not always the case. And so you've also got to find out, first of all, like, does the HOA allow it? And so I always kind of talk about start small, kind of at the most local level. So you're going to want to first check with the HOA and say, okay, is nightly rental even allowed? And then I call the city or the county and find out, hey, is it allowed in this city or county, and what are the rules around it? Because you can have even the same development. This is just something that I even own. I have one area down there where I own a long term rental and a short term rental all in the same neighborhood. And there's a fourth of the neighborhood that is not allowed to do nightly rentals. And so the value on those, it's the exact same floor plan that I own. And it is not the one that's not allowed to do nightly rentals is about $100,000 to $150,000 less than the one that is, just because it's an income producing property. One other thing to factor in is just know that your taxes are going to be higher as well, because if it's an investment property or a second home, you're usually paying property tax that's quite a bit more. It's not your primary home. So sometimes your property tax can be over 2%, like double basically of what your primary residence would be. So some people, if they're really doing a budget, they need to take that into account as well. The other thing that's important, and we're going to talk about this more in depth in the future, is just making sure that you have something professionally designed and something that stands out. And so we own Red Rock Furniture down in St. George. We cater to out of town investors, and we do the whole design for a flat fee, which is under 5,000, which is really cheap. And then we do the ordering, we do everything via Zoom, and we'll even implement everything down to like the plates, the cups ahead of time before the owner even shows up. So we just did an 8-bedroom home down there, and we had everything start to finish. We met with the owner, and we did it within 5 weeks. But the reason that it's important to have it professionally designed, and you really need to interview your designer, because even if the designer is good, if they're too busy, you're going to be losing money, because every month that you have to make a house payment and it's not renting, you're losing money. And so every investor needs to take that into consideration. And then also with a designer, a lot of times they do not have experience with nightly rentals. And so they are used to doing a normal home. And I'm going to tell you two problems with that. Number one is they will put in all the wrong things. A lot of times they'll put in white couches, they'll put in things that break. They don't put in a big enough table or gathering spaces. But then the other mistake they make, and I see this all the time, is that when people go on vacation, they want something bright and colorful and fun. And when they're looking at your listing on Airbnb or VRBO or any platform, they're looking at, hey, I'm going to be on vacation. They want to have fun. They don't want to look at just all gray and white furniture. And so they don't really want to have the same place that they live at normally. So in the homes that I own, I have some palm trees out in the front in the backyard. I have strung. I did like cafe lights, which are just I think cafe lights just always look fun, no matter what. They just mean fun. So I did cafe lights. I did like a really dark blue sofa, which probably I wouldn't put in my normal home, but my son actually tested that out for us. It's an actual fabric that is very durable, and so if there's any kind of spills, you can actually just kind of wipe it up with wet white microfibers. And my son actually spilled a little bit of a Dr. Pepper on it, and when we had first purchased it, came right out. So you want to look at like durability. Is it kid proof? Is it easy to clean? If it's a pain, you don't want to do that. I'm going to also tell you one other little trick that I don't hear anybody ever talk about. And that is, we did actual tempered glass on the top of like nightstands and on top of like our buffet hutch, and then also on top of like the kitchen table. We did tempered glass because, in the case that it might break, right? If somebody slammed something really hard on there, it wouldn't shatter into pieces and fall on the ground. It would just kind of shatter. But we could replace it. But you don't want to be replacing that kitchen table that you just spent $1,500 on. And so we actually will help you if you're in the St. George area. We can actually arrange for you to have that glass put on. But it saves a lot of your furniture. And so we have done that on certain pieces of furniture, and we've rarely seen that done in nightly rentals. But if you look at, going to a hotel, you'll see that commonly. And so you want to kind of proof your house to where everything is easy to clean, easy to maintain, and it's not very breakable. And so again, going back to even the designer, you really want to interview the designer. Call us up, and if you're not in the St. George area, I do know some other designers as well in other areas, but they really need to understand that it's going to be a what I call a pseudo commercial property, because it is a money generator. And so they need to realize that, it doesn't really matter to have brand names inside. It's more important that it looks fun on the photos, because the main point of even your photos, and again, I'm going to really stress this as well, I can't tell you how many people do terrible photos for their listing, but the main purpose of your photos is to get the rental. And you want somebody to book it. You want them to look at it and say, "Hey, I have that." And you want them to feel something. You want them to go, "Wow, this looks really fun. This looks interesting," and then they will book it. And so that's very important. But I've seen people go in with their iPhones and just snap photos. They look terrible, or they're bleached out, or there's just terrible color combinations. And then I can always tell the nightly rentals that it's like, oh, I used my old basement couch or some furniture from my grandma's or whatever. But those are not going to rent as often and not for as much. And there's different articles out there. If you actually search, you'll see that if you have it professionally designed, you usually rent it for about 35% more a night, and usually 25% more often. And so you actually make more money. It's worth it because it's more of an investment. So those are some of the things I wanted to dive deep on today with nightly rentals. But again, going back, it may not be the perfect investment for you if you're just starting out. And so if you call me and talk with me, I want to kind of go over it with you, because sometimes there might be a different product out there. Right now, though, I will say that in the last 2 years, because interest rates have been up, then we've seen a decline in the purchase price or the list prices, and what things are selling for. And things are about 10% lower. And if it's a new builder, a lot of times I can talk with them and we can get them to pay your closing costs, or sometimes buy down your interest rate. I'm actually closing on another nightly rental today, which is kind of funny that I'm talking about this, but in the next few hours, I'm actually closing on one. And we were able to get the builder to buy down our interest rate at about probably over a full percent, and pay for some closing costs. And so there are deals out there. You just have to know where to look, and just know that it doesn't always have to be in a major tourist area. You can also have nightly rentals in other parts of the state of Utah. And I have clients that have done very well with ones that you may not expect in locations that you would never think would be great for a nightly rental, but they do rent And so you really just need to understand kind of the market, what's out there, what the pros and cons are. And also, one other thing I want to touch on is just management companies. You've got to interview management companies and find out what they charge. Some people charge more, but they might offer better services. So you've got to talk with them as well and kind of compare them, and then also even ask to talk with some of their clients so that you can find out if that management company is the right fit for you. But again, there are places, especially in the St. George area, where like even one neighborhood to another, they might gross double. And you really want to make your property unique. Always the ones that have special amenities like putting greens, private hot tubs, private pools. Those are always going to bring in more money as well. And so, if you can afford to go, what I call go big or go home, if you can afford to go big, do it. Sometimes bring in an investor, kind of another partner. But those are great. But right now, there are some really great deals in the market just because of interest rates. And we've had more of a down economy in 2 years with housing, but then especially with nightly rental properties. So, anyway, give me a call and let's talk about it and let's see if this is the right move for you. And I have some ideas on where you also could probably invest your money. Thanks.